which may not be a wise idea, but if everyone has a copy. This was a poem he wrote in 1946. And what's going on here really is it's addressed to us. We are the audience. You who live secure in your warm houses, who return at evening to find hot food and friendly faces, consider whether this is a man who labours in the mud, who knows no peace, who fights for a crust of bread, who dies at a yes or a no. Consider whether this is a woman without hair or name, with no more strength to remember, eyes empty and womb cold like a frog in winter. Consider that this has been. I commend these words to you. Engrave them on your hearts. When you're in your house, when you walk on your way, when you go to bed, when you rise, repeat them to your children. Or may your house crumble, disease render you powerless, your offspring avert their faces from you. Now, Primo Levi was not a believer. There was Auschwitz, so there cannot be God, he wrote. And then he wrote in the margin, I cannot get past this dilemma. I keep trying, but I can't. Which I don't think some of the recent atheist bestsellers have quite caught the full weight of that marginal comment of, I keep trying, but I can't. Anyway, that's another matter. The last 9, but he does want his appeal for us to look and to hear and to witness, to have the power of a religious commandment. The last 9 lines of the poem are a version of the Shema, the central creed of Judaism taken from Deuteronomy. These words shall be upon your heart and you shall teach them to your children. The words in Deuteronomy about the one God and the words of Levi's poem about what has been, the demolition of man by man, are different of course, but in both I think our survival is at stake. I think Norman Jarras has it right. He writes in this poem, Levi issues an injunction to live with the terrible image of human violation before you, near you, on your heart. More is entrusted to these lines than only a wish to have the victims remembered. Entrusted to these lines also is a live question and concern. That is a concern for us. So witnessing, reasoning. We must reason. Levi thought that too many 20th century intellectuals had simply failed to reason things out. Instead, they found it convenient, economic, to pour their faith into a ready-made truth. It was during his chemistry studies, Levi tells us, that he began to take the measure of the totalitarian form of unreason. He discovered zinc couldn't be transformed into zinc sulfate if it's very pure. Now, I should point out at this point, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Just in case you get the wrong impression. Telling you what Levi said, I assume it's true. And he said he could draw 2 possible philosophical conclusions from this. One was to praise purity. And he said, I discarded that. He said, for life to live, impurities are needed. Dissension, diversity. Fascism does not want them. It forbids them. And that's why you're not a fascist, he said to himself. It wants everyone to be the same, and you're not the same. In his essay, Eclipse of the Prophet, Levi took this line of critique much further, and he warned us, when intellectuals behave as prophets, beware. They fix our minds on golden and distant idols, the future paradise. They intoxicate us with both the vision and, they always come along, the great leader who will bear it. After Auschwitz, Levi hoped we'd got past all this. He thought the prophets had been eclipsed. No prophet dares any longer to reveal our tomorrow to us, he wrote. There was only one small cloud on his horizon, though. He wrote, perhaps the last ill-omened specimen is Ayatollah Khomeini, and he won't last long. Well, things turned out differently. Khomeini twisted a great religion and its vision. He secularized it, politicized it, and decked it out with the revolutionary language and intolerant spirit of the European totalitarian tradition. And so, in my opinion, we're confronted with a new form of totalitarianism. In the Iranian democratic activist Ladan Buraman's phrase, totalitarianism in Islamist dress. Today, Khomeini's successor seeks to reveal all our tomorrows to us in one breath, while denying the Holocaust in the other. Levi's alternative to these grandiose dreams and beautiful words involved a triple deflation. He seemed to recommend a much more modest and human scale understanding of who we humans are, ontological deflation, what we can know, an epistemological deflation, and where the proper center of a moral life lies, an ethical deflation. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to move more swiftly through that and move on to the next section, which is judging. It's necessary to judge, he wrote. This is a third bit of armature we need. Hannah Arendt, great theorist of totalitarianism, told us judging is absolutely central to democratic politics because democratic politics involves applied reason and the weighing of concrete alternatives. But too often, I think, we seem to have lost our tongue when it comes to judging. We sometimes seem to have forgotten what we used to know, that there's a difference, all the difference in the world, between judging and labelling, between reasonable acts of discernment and unreasonable acts of prejudice. One of history's great ironies is at work here. Nothing so put us off judging as totalitarianism. As Levi put it, the global labelling so dear to totalitarian regimes repelled us. All that stuff, the enemy of the people, the inferior race, the untermenschen, so on, all that rubbish. But the result is that we seem sometimes to have lost the self-confidence we need for authentic judging, even when we're faced with a new form of totalitarianism. Who are we to judge, it's often said, or thought? I think Levi saw a great danger in that approach. Indeed, he wrote, to judge is necessary precisely because we are not totalitarians. So judging also. Now, this might be more controversial, I don't know, but I read Levi as saying in a qualified way that part of our moral and political armature we need against the threat we face is the understanding that we have to fight back. Levi is tormented at the thought of picking up a gun and killing. Angier, his biographer, writes of his deep horror of violence. Yet in 1943, he would resist his instincts and make a moral choice to accept the necessity of killing. After weeks of indecision, he joined the resistance. Levi had decided a personal ethic of non-violence was inadequate. By joining the resistance, he had resolved the tension between what the theologian Reinhold Niebuhr famously called moral man and immoral society. One night, after a successful raid to capture arms, Levi was talking to his friend Aldo as they walked back to the camp. "How sad," said Levi, "that a man must seek weapons to use against other men." The sadness is his personal feeling as a moral man, but the seeking, nonetheless, and their use is his public ethic in an immoral society. I think both the sadness and the seeking are to his credit. And yet, as always with Levi, and this is his great strength, he qualifies and complicates his first thought, fight, with other thoughts very quickly. I point to three here: the need for prudence, the threshold of last resort, and the awareness of the unintended consequences of violence, or what Levi called the hard-to-control genealogies of violence. Prudence. Levi wanted his politicians to be like chess players. This is what he said about them. He wanted them mediating before moving, even though knowing that the time allowed for each move is limited. Remembering that every move of ours provokes another by the opponent. Difficult but not impossible to foresee. Paying for wrong moves. So I don't think I need to belabor the relevance of those insights. Prudence. Last resort. Violence should be a last resort, he wrote. There do not exist problems that cannot be solved around a table, though he added, crucially, provided there is goodwill and reciprocal trust. Back to judgment. Well, is there? The inescapable of judgment again. Unintended consequences. From violence, only violence is born, he writes. I disagree with that formulation. I think it's an overstatement and contradicted by much else that Levi writes and much that Levi did. From violence came the liberation of Primo Levi, not just more violence. What he's getting at, though, in The Drowned and the Saved, where he writes that, is this, and I think it's an important point, that war, even a just war, will pulse out violence in uncontrollable ways, in a pendular action that becomes more frenzied, he said.